I remember kneeling down that night and saying to God, God, these folk see something in me. They say that I can listen a bit, and I want to offer that to you.
God's story, your life. Unfolding short stories.
Right before we started recording Trevor's story, I asked him if I could say a quick word of prayer over him. And he replied with a soft South African accent, "It doesn't have to be quick." That unhurried pause highlights the heart of Trevor and what he shares about in today's unfolding short story. It's about the quiet power of listening. So lean in as he recounts a formative leadership affirmation exercise where his groupmates could name only one gift that they saw in him. You can listen a bit.
Hi, my name is Trevor Hudson. I live in a town called Benoni, which is just outside Johannesburg. And if you were to ever fly to South Africa, you would land at our national airport. Benoni is the town closest to that airport. I've just written a book called In Search of God's Will. One of the reasons why I wrote that book is because I just have a very deep conviction that God has not a generic will for everyone, but a very personal will, that God calls each one of us by name. And that really comes out of my own experience with finding God's way and will for my own life. And I remember a very significant event. I was in my early 20s, and we had a group exercise. I was on a leadership course. There were 4 of us in the group. And what we had to do was we had to go around the circle and we had to affirm the gifts in each other's lives that we had seen and witnessed as we worked together. So we went around. The first person, we affirmed the person's ability to put things together, to draw a team together, to motivate. We went to the second person, how this person was able to cast a vision and take people with him along the way. And eventually they came to me and they were silent. And I thought, let me just wait. This is supposed to be an affirmation exercise. The first person said, Trevor, I don't know what to say, but I think you can listen a bit. And I thought to myself, that's okay. Maybe it'll get better. There's still 2 more people to go. And the second person said, Trevor, I can't improve on that. I think you can listen a bit. And I thought that there's 1 more person to go. It must get better. And the person said, no, I think you can listen a bit. And I remember going home that night from that affirmation exercise feeling thoroughly depressed. That all I had was I could listen a bit. But I can still remember this. I remember kneeling down that night and saying to God, God, these folk see something in me. They say that I can listen a bit, and I want to offer that to you. I've always been struck when God came to Moses and gave Moses that task of liberating the slaves, and Moses made excuses. And then God just asked one question, what's in your hand? And he had a staff. It wasn't much. So I just offered this gift. I can listen a bit. I offered this to God.
At first, when Trevor heard this, he was a little disappointed. But that simple phrase became a foundation for his ministry. He brought it to God as a simple offering. And Trevor's discovered how he can lead others in this incredible gift of listening a bit.
And now, almost 50 years later, I look back on my life with overwhelming gratitude of how God just took a very simple gift, capacity, talent, maybe which I didn't even see in my life, and somehow has led me into my vocation, which has got different layers to it of getting alongside people in therapy and counseling. But I really learned that one of the ways God leads us, one of the ways we find God's will, is sometimes just to pay attention to what we may consider to be very insignificant gifts or talents or abilities or capacities. And that somehow, if we're willing to own it and then develop it and grow it, we will never know how God can use that. And we will never know what an adventure it becomes in our own lives. pretty ordinary, and God works in very ordinary ways. But one of the things that's given me such a confident assurance of the reality of God's Spirit is how God has taken something very simple and used that something very simple in exponential ways that I could never, ever have dreamt. So if I've got anything to say to you today, is God comes to you and says to you, what have you got in your hands? And when you offer that freely to be used in the service of others, I think that's one way. It's not the only way, but it's one way in which we begin to discern God's personal will, God's personal calling in our lives. I think that's one of the greatest adventures that we can ever go on. So thanks for listening to me and letting me share my little story with you today.
Trevor Hudson is known throughout South Africa for his retreats and writing. All those years ago, he offered his modest gift of listening back to the Lord, and the ripple effect has stretched across decades of counseling, pastoring, and leading others to leaning in to what God might be speaking to them. But what exactly does it mean for Trevor to listen?
It's to the Spirit, listening to God, listening to people, listening to the pain of the world, listening to the suffering. For me, listening has become a very big word, and it's got so many layers to it. Sometimes I forget that it's the very first commandment that God ever gave to us. Deuteronomy 6:4, listen, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. That before we are called to love the Lord our God, we're called to listen. And that word Shema, that Jewish word, it's just a beautiful word. It's be aware, listen, be responsive. So for me, it's every day, it's paying attention, wonder what you're up to. Can I listen to your own Spirit in my life? Each encounter that I'm with. And for me, it's been particularly important in South Africa to really listen to the heartache and the heartbreak and the immense human suffering that's in my midst. And as I listen, I can't take it all on. But what I can do as I listen is I can listen to that human cry that, as it were, has my name written on it, that I can respond to. It's almost as if I need to find my little part in God's dream. And I find my little part by maybe hearing that one human cry that really, really grabs hold of my heart, and then learning ways of responding to that cry, be it the cry of the economically poor, be it the cry of the invisible elderly, be it the cry of the mentally handicapped. Over the years, I've really had to discern, Lord, I can't take it on all, but I can listen to that cry that perhaps I can respond to with my own presence and my own resources.
Do you ever feel like you need to get away from the noise? Even now, Trevor shared with me that he's leading people in this listening. Earlier, he referenced Moses and just the power of getting away to retreat, to listening, to hearing from God. He's passionate about helping others listen, even if just for a bit.
Bit cautious about even saying this because it may be a bit self-promoting, and I really don't want it to be that. But there are two people, one who's come out from Canada, and a professor, and another person from the USA, a psychiatrist, and they're doing a 30-day retreat. And I think they've come all the way to do it. And each day I meet with them and I just take them through 30 days of prayer and scripture and seeking, they're both seeking deep discernment about their own lives and their careers. And I think to myself, wow, how have you brought me together with two people from overseas here in Benoni? It just boggles my mind. And I go back to that moment over 50 years ago when someone said you can listen a bit.
50 years have passed since Trevor Hudson first offered God his small gift of listening. Today, that gift shapes retreats across South Africa and echoes through his latest book, In Search of God's Will, Discerning a Life of Faithfulness and Purpose. You can find a link to that in the show notes. As you step back into your week, follow Trevor's example. Slow down, listen, and place whatever talent you have in God's hands. See what He can do with a long obedience. The Unfolding is a faith podcast. You can discover more at myfaithpodcasts.com.